Welcome to the Brave Feminine Leadership podcast, where I get to interview incredible global leaders and we get to dig into delicious conversations and soak up their wisdom and perspective on life and all things leadership. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Alessandra Edwards. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled to meet you in person.
Yes, absolutely. So after our wonderful initial phone call, which was fabulous. So let me share with our audience a little bit about you, Alessandra, and then we're going to jump right into the conversation. So Alessandra Edwards is a leading expert in the DNA of performance and well-being. With over 15 years of experience as a health scientist and a clinical nutritionist, Alessandra empowers high-performing leaders across the globe to unlock their genetic potential for peak energy and resilience. Just want to pause and say, who doesn't need that, right? Alessandra is also the author of the forthcoming book, and the book is called The DNA of Performance: How to Unlock Your Genes for Ultimate Energy and Vitality. And when you're not guiding leaders to their next level, you're training for triathlons and exploring the frontiers of health optimization. So excited to talk. Alessandra, can you expand for us? Who are you as a human being? Let's get into your story.
So first of all, I'm saying hello to you from Melbourne today. And just to give you a little bit of a background, I'm here in my home office, and I have two beautiful kids, one of whom has just made it to state today. So he's just won a competition. So I've just received the WhatsApp. So
wow.
Very excited about that. I'm very active. I have a beautiful dog who's my second husband, as my husband says. And I'm generally a very active, passionate person. I love grabbing life, literally like this, and just living fully. And probably because of my background and upbringing that we discussed previously on our introductory call, I'm absolutely determined to just drink every last drop of life that I gratefully receive on a daily basis.
Amazing. Now, I know that I've touched very briefly on what you do, and we'll kind of get into that as we navigate more through the conversation. But I also know you've got a really deep why in terms of how you ended up there. So let's go through, your background. You just alluded to a little bit then. So let's actually go through your story.
Sure. And please interrupt me at any time. I can tend to go off in my sort of verbose meandering. So
we'll work it out.
Work it out. So I was born in Italy, in Rome, 51 years ago, almost to the date. And I was brought up in a French household. So my mum was French. And she would be so proud of me for being here today, because she was probably my first model of brave feminine leadership. She was a self-made woman, grew up in Nazi-occupied Paris when she was little during the Second World War, and just middle-class family. And they were very active in the resistance. So I grew up with this sense of real self-efficacy, that women can do anything. And even though she didn't go to university, she managed to, bit by bit, climb her way through an amazing professional career, ended up working at the UN. And so, if you like, I was brought up in this environment of possibility. And a lot of stress, however. My father owned his own company, and things didn't go very well. And as the company disbanded, one of his main, the co-founder basically had committed suicide because of financial distress. So at age 8, I found myself, moving homes and experiencing sort of high levels of stress. And but still, I have fantastic memories of just this very strong woman who just, would take the lead and do all of that. So that's, if you like, the background. But also, my mother was a very unwell person, and that's the secondary memory that I had of her. She was always really sick. Right. And my father died when I was 12 and a half years old. So he was diagnosed with brain cancer. And my mum, being a classic French lady, did not believe in Italian medical institutions. So she took him abroad to see the best surgeons. And so I spent the year basically living in a friend's family home whilst they were abroad. And I think, again, that shaped this sense of resiliency and independence.
And he died away from you.
That's right. Yes, he died away, and he actually died literally the week before I was undergoing middle school exams.
Right.
And so my mum didn't tell me so that I could finish the exams. And so that was a really difficult period, very traumatic period. And then my mum was diagnosed with cancer literally within 18 months of my dad passing away. I'm an only child. She didn't really have family in Italy. And it's funny because I don't really have strong memories of me feeling upset. Obviously, I must have been worried, but what I remember is just my mother receiving this diagnosis of advanced breast cancer, and it had spread, and just coming home and sharing this diagnosis with me, and with absolute gusto and passion, just telling me, I'm going to fight this. Literally almost like with a spear in her hand. And that's what I remember, is just this warrior woman just going, right, we're going to do it. So I never felt worried. Now as an adult and as a parent, I look back and I think that's insane. That's a 12-year-old child who doesn't have relatives, single parent with advanced cancer. And I felt safe.
How amazing.
Yeah. And yet, those were the beginnings of starting to feel like, oh, maybe this is a little bit of a family legacy. And what I didn't mention is that actually I was born with a congenital heart defect. So at a very early age, I was told that I could never exercise. And
so you knew that from very early on?
Yes, I did, because I had specific episodes with my heart in the playground, which then were investigated. So from age 6, I would often be sitting on the bench, or I could partake of mild exercise, but certainly nothing serious. And so that, combined with this family history, I lost both my grandparents from my mother's side, didn't meet them. My uncle died age 40 of a heart attack. My aunt died of breast cancer age 40. Wow. Literally every year there was a death. So I grew up almost like with this unusual normalization that, people die young, and that's a thing. And it's only afterwards that I started to understand, actually, no, that is not common. That really is the exception to the rule. And I started to understand that in a way, potentially I would have two choices. So one, to take on this identity that wasn't mine, yes, or the second one, to start questioning it. Unfortunately, it's that hindsight is wonderful, isn't it? I mean, I'm probably sounding incredibly wise, knowing all these things, but let me assure you that at the time I was really head down, bum up, did the classic thing of university, straight into a job. I was extremely competitive, a high achiever, always did well at school, wanted to do even better in my career. And this realization of choosing a different path for myself only happened once I experienced really significant issues with my health.
So was there a moment for you that stands out for you at that point?
Yeah. So the first moment that really wasn't a moment of huge self-awareness, but it was a first glimpse into what was to come, was in my early to mid-20s, when I had a really significant mental health episode, when I experienced psychosis with hallucinations. And that was incredibly scary. And obviously sought therapy, tried medication, all the usual things that people do, and didn't help. I'm not saying that that's not helpful for other people, just particularly in that moment, that wasn't helpful for me. And it led for me to look out and seek solace in an attempted suicide. And people really rallied around me, and that made me realize how I had a lot of richness in my life, despite the deep despair. And the second moment was when, after a successful initial career in a professional sense, I experienced what we will call basically a burnout experience. And I know that we nowadays tend to use this label almost like, dishing it out like candy, but I think people will understand what I mean when I say that profound malaise and complete lack of life, not
Yes.
just lack of energy, where you basically...
How old were you then?
So at the time I was 27, 28. Yeah. Yes. And this happened in spite of a lot of well-meaning people around me seeing the signs of this incipient drop. But I was just so full of my own hunger for achievement that I just completely brushed it off to the classic thing of, I'm actually deep down, I feel I'm a bit superhuman. You don't understand. I'm just going to finish this project. I'm just going to need a good holiday. I'm in my 20s. I'm strong. What are you talking about?
So you're invincible at this stage.
Absolutely invincible.
We've all been there.
We've all been there, right? With a litany of signs of things breaking down. Yeah, so just immunity going down, just inability to switch off, insomnia, all sorts of things, digestive issues, IBS. And then that really hit me so hard that we moved beyond the burnout. It literally got to a point where even medical practitioners could not give me a label.
Wow.
of what was happening. And so I now understand in hindsight that wasn't just a moment in time. That was a series of events. And now with the work I do with genetics, also understanding that, perhaps I wasn't born with the strongest of constitutions. I was brought up in very stressful environments, lots of traumas that were swept under the carpet, and just being very high functioning in that sense, not looking after myself, not even simple things like a healthy diet, things that we now know can help foster more resilience. So it was in the making, a long time in the making. And I think that what helped me was actually that I did put myself through these high pressure environments, and now I know, knowing my own genetic makeup, that I really tend to thrive under pressure.
Right.
Because at genetic level, I tend towards extremely low level of neurotransmitters across the board.
Right.
And so that's why I felt very attracted to those environments. However, without having the scaffolding and foundation that helps you to create that sustainability of performance, of course, it's inevitable to them.
So how did you shift then across from, the corporate career, successful marketing career?
Yes.
Is what you were doing at the time. How did you then shift across? Because I know that's been a kind of gradual exploration of things as well, but where did you go from there?
Yes. So that was funny, isn't it? When we look back, and I think we should all write our own biography at some point, if anything, just to understand the narrative and the seeds that precede the development and growth of us as humans. It's really interesting. I have this distinct memory of, I think, being 20, being at university and having chronic back pain, and someone telling me to go and try yoga. Now, what I didn't mention before is that growing up in Italy with my mum not being a well person, however, a very successful one professionally, what I didn't mention is that we live with the polypharmacy. So you could open our cabinet in our bathroom,
yes,
and there was A to Z of medications. And I still remember my mum telling the doctor what medication to prescribe her for her symptoms. It was hilarious. So I grew up with this idea that the body is something to be controlled with science
yes,
and medication, and that everything else around it, anything that could be called holistic or whatever word we have for it, is absolute mumbo jumbo and in fact to be feared. And
so you were beyond cynical. It was all sitting in the woo-woo bucket.
absolutely, even yoga, something like physical therapy, I mean, would be completely woo-woo. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
It got so bad, I was taking so many painkillers that I thought, what have I got to lose? I will try one session. And that session just completely opened this whole world, because within one session, I had something like a 50% improvement in my symptoms.
Wow.
And yeah, it was incredible. So didn't really do anything with it other than it opened the possibility that my worldview might be a little bit contained.
Yes.
And black and white. And so when this happened, I rekindled my interest in this woo-woo area, or what I thought of as woo-woo, because the traditional avenues had basically sent me away with a number of prescriptions and dismissed me as broken. And whilst I was broken as in physiologically, in spirit, deep down, I knew that there was a way and something could be fixed. And I just would not accept that that would be my state ongoing.
Absolutely.
And I had this strong sense of purpose. I didn't know quite what at the time, but I've always had that, even as a child, that I was meant to be here with a purpose, to do something, to contribute. And but I remember at the time that this went on for a few years. I was so unwell at some point. I actually wrote a letter to my baby, because I got pregnant in the meantime, that I thought I was dying.
Wow.
Yes. So what happened then is I decided basically to go back and do a second degree. So I did a health science degree, started to explore that side of things, did clinical practice, then became really interested in genetics. As around 2003, we had the Human Genome project was completed. So things just started to really happen, and commercial companies started to provide the ability for practitioners to do genetic testing. And so that became, I would say, more than a passion, an obsession, to help me also frame this inherited identity that I had taken on, that I come from really unhealthy stock, unhealthy genes, and that my destiny would probably manifest in early death and all sorts of unwanted experiences. So that was the moment when I really then decided to go, oh, I understand this. So this is a blueprint. This is a general blueprint, the same way as we might get an architectural blueprint, but then we can choose how to make modifications within the house, that we materials that we put in, the tradies that we bring in, the functionality of the house. And so that really helped me to understand that, number one, understanding what this blueprint is a game changer, absolute game changer. So as I said earlier, I know that I tend towards depression,
right,
because of across the board having these low levels of neurochemicals. And I also understand that with a few tweaks, I can easily bump up these neurochemicals through specific exercise practices, through specific dietary choices, even specific nutritional supplements, the kind of situations I put myself in, the different social adventures I choose. So I can fully be in control of this whole organism, and also cross my fingers and hope for the best, because there's a whole area of life also where stuff happens that's out of our control. But it's been incredibly empowering as a journey for me, and more importantly, as a journey as a practitioner and mentor to lots of women.
So you put this puzzle together, as I said earlier, there was a really deep why and a really compelling why for you, let alone your family, but also early on a lot of your life experiences and then your working experiences. The thing that automatically, I've got a million questions, Alessandra, straight away, but so the thing that, you work with a lot of high-performing leaders. What sort of stuff do you see? You know how you said you tend to, depression, low neurotransmitters and different things like that. What are some of the other things that you see? Because this is fascinating, right? Anything that, can help people unlock how to, I'm tapping my body as I say this for people listening. Anything that can unlock how to better harness our potential in that regard is fascinating.
Yes. Well, let me premise that by saying that by the very fact that I do work, as you said, with a lot of senior leaders, they're not the super young. So I don't work with people in their 20s and 30s.
Yes.
It takes a while to get
Are they more like us, sort of 40s?
They're more like us.
Yes.
They're more like us. So, 45 plus, I would say, is, and now I'm currently working with a leader at the moment who's 75, which is
amazing,
exciting. So we have to think that biologically, obviously, the specific presentation of a woman in her mid 40s to mid 50s is very different to a woman in her mid 30s.
Yes.
So that would be possibly why I have a bit of a skewed, sample.
Yes.
But certainly, in terms of top level things that I see, I would put them under categories of lack of sense of control. And what I mean by this is, rather than just give you a list of symptoms, I just want to explain
yes.
that generally, because these are high-performing leaders, they don't necessarily love the first approach to just go, wow, right, here's my vulnerable space, and these are all the things that are wrong in my life.
Yes.
Okay. So I have to say that generally there's a little bit of a pattern of, I'm doing great.
Yes.
However, the thing that is really getting to me is that I've got my career down pat, I've got the family, I've got the kids, they're growing, great relationship usually, so good things. Yeah, maybe a little bit of a health history here and there, but they're doing well overall. But then there is this overarching sense of my body is no longer responding to my directions.
Yes.
So these are leaders often at the helm of really large organizations. So they're used to implementing. I mean, these are not people I'm going to be teaching to suck eggs and go, oh, are you sleeping? Are you exercising? They're already at the gym, right? They know what a healthy diet is. They're doing their stuff, and their body is just slowly breaking down. And what I mean by this, and this is not a vanity metric, but the first thing usually that comes up is I'm really concerned that over the last 2 to 5 years, I have regularly put on weight.
Yes.
Okay. And it's not a concern because they want to be wearing the bikini at the next family holiday. Is this thing of, but I'm doing everything that I know. And so if this is happening and I'm expanding year in, year out, what else is happening that I don't know?
Yes.
So that is a real concern. And so this mismatch between their ability to be self-efficacious and not having results is a complete cognitive dissonance.
And for a group who are really used to, and I say this as being in that group, control, is important.
Yeah, you can say it.
Yeah, control is important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I put myself in that category as well, right? If you're doing all this work and you are following well-established directives,
yes.
right? Whether from your dietitian or your doctor. So again, let me say that these are women who are not just contacting me out of the blue and they've not done anything
They've
before.
tried a lot.
They've tried. They've seen plenty of people.
Yes.
And so they're really scratching their heads and, trying to work out. So I'd say that's the first thing. The second thing is, and again, that's quite scary for them, is a loss of self-confidence.
Yes.
Yeah. And then that goes hand in hand with this idea of like, if I'm not that anymore, if I'm no longer the leader who walks in the room with conviction, a vision, a sense of purpose, and more importantly, a strong sense of identity, all the old imposter syndrome things that were, always burning, a little bit bubbling under the surface, I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
And so I've seen leaders who have told me I've had to step back from board positions or going part-time. I just feel that I don't have a voice, not because I'm not given a voice. I used to have a voice. I now feel intimidated.
Yes, to use it. Yes.
My opinions. And this is not me. And they show me, this is not me. I've never been this person. I don't understand it. I'm feeling brain fogged. I'm, searching for words. I feel like I'm losing my marbles and I'm a little bit worried. So that that's probably the main presentation that I see. And with it comes a sense of loss of vitality. So starting to feel a bit old. I don't have the get up and go that I used to. I'm a little bit disengaged, demotivated. So it's a broad spectrum, but ultimately it really boils down to this loss of confidence and loss of sense of control over oneself.
So how do we, and I imagine that we've all got different genetic kind of makeups and things like that. But what's an example of like something you would find in someone's genetic makeup and how they could tweak it, or another way of me saying to you, if there's 3 things we all need to know, maybe there's a lot of questions wrapped up in there, what would they be? So maybe the first question.
Yes, let's do the first question. So I'll just give you a simple example. So the first thing I hear when someone says, because we do cognitive fitness testing as well to actually test their memory, deductive reasoning, executive functioning, all of that. So we can see immediately if there's red flags that then need to be referred to a neurologist. So when I hear someone going, okay, I have this brain fog, I can't think clearly, I don't know what's happening. The first thing that I look at is basically whether they have genetics related to a label that I call hunter-gatherer. Okay, so just to make it easy to understand, because as soon as I say hunter-gatherer, we can start to imagine, okay, what kind of lifestyle that person might need to live in order to be at their best potential. So hunter-gatherers as they age tend to have a difficulty in absorbing specific types of fats called phospholipids into their brain and into their nervous system. And so the things that might come up for them is as they're aging, their cholesterol levels, especially bad cholesterol, start to go up. It's non-responsive to dietary changes. So again, they're feeling very despondent about the fact that they're even going on low-fat diets or whatever, and they get marginal gains, but the GP keeps saying, maybe we should consider a statin or, so understanding that then really helps me counsel someone to make quite significant changes as to, how they are living, and also giving them a strategy for longevity, because with hunter-gatherer, we know that they can be more prone towards cognitive deficit as they age. And so we can do so much preventative work around that. We can optimize the brain function. We can replenish all these phospholipids. We can check the vitamin B12 levels. We can change their exercise routines to optimize specific levels of neurochemicals. So that could be one example. The other example could be that I might want to be looking at the genetics related to what I call the shooting star profile. The shooting star, generally, they will know they're this because their energy tends to come in fits and bursts throughout the day.
Yes.
And they are usually people who have significant carb cravings, sugar cravings, but they don't feel good after eating them. So they have the classic carb crash. And this becomes more significant as they age. And for women particularly, they tend to store weight, very stubborn weight around the middle. And so here's 2 presentations, both with this kind of brain fog.
Yes.
One is more related to their genetics around these lipid metabolisms for their brain health. And for this other person, we'll fit them with continuous glucose monitoring. And we'll see, I had someone today who had healthy sushi for lunch, right?
Yes.
And a glass of water, and their blood glucose went up to 12 millimoles. Whereas the next person will have the same, fish sushi, and they will have barely
a blip.
Barely a blip.
How many types, because you've talked about the shooting star and the hunter-gatherer, I immediately want to know what I am. I feel myself in both. But how many other types are there?
There are lots, because I have this framework of signatures. So we look at diet signatures. So there will be, 3 or 4 within there. Then there's a resilience signature. And so there will be 3 in that. So there's a framework that I look at that is the framework that I think in terms of what are the foundation of physiological high performance for a leader. Yeah. So my capabilities are not around executive coaching traditional as such. So I assume people already have those capabilities. What they don't know, and this is number 1 of the 3 things that everyone should know, is they don't know what's going on under the bonnet. No. So, and it's amazing when you think about it, and we all do it. So these are some of the most successful, competent women in Australia.
Yes.
Yeah. They lead companies that have thousands of people. They have millions and millions of budgets, and they are in control.
Yes.
And the one thing they have no control over is the operational system of their body. Yeah. And so now, in the last 10 years, we are really talking a lot about financial education for women, especially young women, right?
Yes.
This financial literacy is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
All women need it. What we don't talk about is health literacy.
Yes.
We relinquish and abdicate our power to experts, and I'm not anti-doctors. Some of my closest friends are GPs, surgeons. I love them. They're awesome people and overworked, underpaid. Nevertheless, they work within a framework that is a very specific medical diagnosing model.
Yes.
They're not high performance experts. And so we want to be agents of self high performance, and yet we abdicate this power and knowledge to someone whose specialty isn't that at all. And so we take information when the doctor says, you're fine, let's see how this goes. Let's reconvene in 6 months of 12 months.
Yeah.
What you're doing is that you are accepting that the doctor is putting your life in a holding pattern.
Yes.
Yeah. Just like tower control, traffic control, waiting to land until they can safely land you into a diagnostic label whereby, now you're sick, so I know what to do about this.
I can treat you now.
Now we can treat you.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that we do have that.
Yes.
My mum got over breast cancer that was advanced thanks to an incredible team of oncologists, surgeons, and I'm so bloody grateful that that exists.
Yes.
And in Australia, I've lived in many countries. I 100% know, not just believe, we have the best medical system in the world.
Yeah.
I don't think people realise that.
And Alessandra, I mentioned to you as well that, and a lot of the listeners will know that I had my own breast cancer experience sort of 6 or so years ago, and, incredibly in awe of the team that treated me and super happy to hand over everything to them at that point, right? It's like, yes, please. And, would do that again in a heartbeat. But interestingly, when I finished and when, I was depleted. Every part of me was depleted. It's not who I turned to rebuild.
Right.
Myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I derailed you then. So the second thing of the 3 that everyone should know?
The second thing is, if you are, I presume your listeners will be, similar age, 40 plus. So the second thing that I really invite you to learn for yourself, and you don't need a practitioner for this, is to understand 3 particular metrics about your body. And you can then check on these yearly. And these metrics are so important for your longevity, and they tell you a lot. So these metrics can be obtained through a DEXA body composition scan.
Yeah.
So you can Google this. There are different regulations according to what state you're in. In Victoria, in the last 3 to 4 years, you now need a referral, but you can find places that do an automatic online referral. In most other states, you can just rock up and go into a body composition scan. Now, these are not the scans that you do at the gym where you're just sitting on scales. Those are called bioimpedance. They're not validated and they don't give you really accurate results. So a DEXA body composition scan will give you 3 metrics. And the first thing, what you need to know is your visceral fat score. Yeah. So basically, this is a score that tells you how much fat you have growing in your organs. And you could be extremely thin and have high levels of visceral fat. Why is this important? Number one, it's going to drastically increase your risk of heart disease. It's going to increase your risk of cancer. And now there's new evidence that it can be one of the contributing factors to development of dementia because fat tissue creates inflammatory cytokines. Yeah. So that's number one. And then also I think that's really useful, especially for women in the perimenopause, menopausal stage, because then you can really understand whether that increased girth, increased weight is something that really needs to be addressed quite drastically, or it's something that's a little bit more of a vanity metric, and you can learn maybe to live with that if you don't want to make some changes, right? The second thing is your lean muscle mass, and that DEXA will tell you that. Again, we know that the brawnier you are, the brainier you are, that's what we say. So, and we lose muscle mass really significantly from 40s onwards, and after 60, it's literally a vertical drop. So it's really important for cognitive function. It's really important for maintaining good metabolic health, because it helps burn glucose, and it's going to be really important for preventative action. So if you're a well person in Australia and you look after your diet and your medical metrics are okay, the number one risk for an early death is actually a fall.
A fall?
A fall. Yes, 100%. So we always talk about heart disease and cancer. We don't talk about falls, but actually it is the highest cause of death.
Wow.
So, so knowing where you're at, and it will give you a metric of, you will be benchmarked basically against your peers, and then you can start working on that. And then the third thing is your bone mass. So it will just give you a raw score, and it will tell you whether you're below the line or above the line. And this is so important for women, because especially if you're not on HRT, you're really at higher risk of osteoporosis. Really, this happens quite quickly after becoming menopausal. And so to understand whether you have good amounts of bone or not, you can be very proactive. And the sooner you catch it, the less risk you have to then have to go on to ongoing medication for osteoporosis, which can cause really significant side effects. So I think that those are really three simple, very specific things that, I'd love to encourage your listeners to learn for themselves. And that would be part of a journey, right?
Yeah, amazing. So, and the third one, because there were three things in the DEXA scan, was there a third tip? I'm hoping I haven't lost count.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we did 1, 3, and then the fourth one. And the fourth one is actually not linked specific to, biological things, but the third one is, and this is, I'm really biased for this, is understand your genetics. Really do understand your genetics. And you don't need to do like full genomic testing where you can find out your risk for cancer or things that are, maybe harder to deal with, but really understand fundamentally who you are, what is the essence of you. I think that is really, really important.
It's so fascinating that you say that. It was interesting how you said you can do one that's not quite as confronting. I often ask groups of leaders a really simple question around, do they have a will? And the number of people who've got a will on their to-do list and it stays there for several years, because doing a will is confronting, right? You've got to make decisions in there that you don't want to think about. It's really fascinating that also one of the reasons for not doing some of these things is because we don't want to confront these things. How do you encourage people to confront these things? Like if we think about that, and I think of myself before my own cancer diagnosis, I was invincible. This stuff didn't happen to me. Like, how do we convince people to take control of this, Alessandra?
And I think, Melissa, that people who have gone through either a family-based health scare or a health scare themselves, if you like, the wool gets pulled from over your eyes, right?
Yes.
And you go, okay, well, is there anything that I should know in order to decrease the risk? I mean, obviously, these things are not black and white, but whereas I think that there is this ongoing thing of feeling invincible. Yes. So I'm very direct. And so when I give, keynotes and speeches, what I say is basically unfool yourself. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you owe it to yourself, because we're all aging. And what happens is that we are all visualizing our retirement or whatever you have in store for your 6th, 7th, or 8th decade and beyond, based on assumptions from youth, because that's how the brain works.
Yes.
It can't compute anything other than a prediction based on what you know. And so if you have always been well, and especially if you have parents who are long lived, and that's what you assume,
Yes.
and these are assumptions. And so I say to you, if you're currently a leader, think about the processes you have in place for leading your workplace or managing your team. I hazard a guess that you're not going to be leaving things to chance, right? You have a plan. And sometimes you have to have difficult conversations with your team about things you don't really want to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah. Brene Brown, I just love this quote when she talks about vulnerability and how she reframes vulnerability, which I love because it's really related to the Brave Feminine leadership context. But that vulnerability is not a win or lose situation. It's just the ability to step up and be seen in situations that are out of your control, where you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I imagine most of your listeners do that on a daily basis or a weekly basis. We don't do this for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so this is a message of bravery. You can do it. Yes. There is nothing scary to be found out. What's scary is not knowing and then being given a diagnosis 10 years down the line over which you have no control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's that whole, and I love that you brought Brene in and all of those things as well, but it's, we don't think about future you. Like it's sort of living in the day and in the moment. So I really love the work that you do. I've got so many questions. I mean, one of the things in particular, you suggested a book that I haven't read. So you called out a book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist.
Yes.
Why is that your favourite book? What's your key takeaway from that?
The book that it's taken me 3 or 4 goes to get through. So I'll be honest, is some brick. So you could get it and use it as a doorstop if you don't read it, if you're still reading on, hard copies. So it's a hard-going book. But what I really loved about it is that I think it's a message of hope. Yes. So he talks about it. He's a scientist that looks really at the interaction and integration of the different parts of the brain, the different hemisphere of the brains. But it's also used as a metaphor for understanding where we've ended up in today's society. Yeah. So there is really an overemphasis on left-sided type of leadership and thinking and life. So we've become so evidence-based, so scientific. Everything is very black and white.
Yes.
The detriment of a more right side way of thinking. And look, he's not saying that it's all black and white, because there's integration between the 2 hemispheres. But I find that to be such a useful metaphor in my daily life, and particularly since COVID, when we now have been experiencing and witnessing such a polarization of positioning and stances. And we've seen it with the Olympics, with what's happened, with the breakdancing. We're seeing it now with the electoral campaign in the US.
Yes.
We are no longer allowed as humans to have opinions. Everything is polarized. The moment you or someone else has a differing opinion to me, the general consensus is that they are wrong and they are to be shamed and completely rejected. My argument, and what Ian McGilchrist is saying, is that actually life isn't black and white.
Yeah.
The only reason we want it to be black and white is because it makes things easier and simpler for our brain to deal with. And for me, real authentic brave feminine leadership is actually about becoming really comfortable with ambiguity.
I'm going to ask the question anyway, because I always do, and I know you'll probably want to expand on it, but that when you talked about all of that and, the fact that all of our models around leadership and everything like that have become very reliant on, left side thinking, it makes me think about, I think one of the wonderful things I see so many leaders, I don't see this as a gender thing. I see it as someone available to all of us, but bringing into their leadership more gut and intuition and relationships and, a much broader kind of scope. So I love that. Let's go to the final question that I ask everybody that you've given us a sneak peek on that I loved. But from your perspective, Alessandra, what does brave feminine leadership mean? And do you think it needs to change?
I thought a lot about this question because you gave me a little bit of warning about this. I don't think this is an easy question to answer. I know that, we're coming to the end of the podcast, but I just want to make it clear that, again, the way I'm going to answer this reflects this notion of, I think we need to be more comfortable with ambiguity and open-ended questions and answers that lead to more questions, rather than simplistic definitions that we all like sound bites now. We're the Twitter generation or the X generation. So when I thought about it, I thought in terms of what does it mean to me personally as a leader in my own space, as a former leader in a professional organization, but also working with a lot of particularly feminine leaders, but also male leaders who exhibit feminine style leadership. So for me, it's about two things. So one is authenticity of self, where we're bringing in this left side, right side combination. Yeah. So it's not just all about being fully intuitive and fully empathetic or being, fully, chain of command, kind of command and control style leadership. It's about the understanding that everything is complex. Humans are complex. Teams dynamics are complex. The world is complex, and understanding that as everything gets faster, because communications are now global and we are more open to vulnerabilities in terms of pandemics, it is only going to get worse.
Yes.
So for me, that's what it means. It means that traditional ways of fitting everything into a neat box where we are projecting results based on a particular process and we have these outcomes, we have to let go of that paradigm and rely at times more on inclusion, collaboration, emotional intelligence, things that are softer and we haven't quite worked out how to quantify. And therefore, that's why we don't have so many feminine trait leaders, whether they're men or women, regardless of their sex, is that because we can't quantify it, we tend to dismiss it. So I think there's a lot of value in that. So that's number one, bring this on authenticity. But the second thing is also bringing in a strong sense of self-efficacy, because I think it's hard to walk into a room where there is a traditional leadership paradigm and start leading from the middle rather than from the front. Yeah, and being more collaborative. So that really requires a strong sense of self, a strong sense of I can do this, because I'm comfortable with ambiguity. So, and I think that the only thing that needs to change, I don't think it's the brave feminine leadership per se, but is perhaps the culture around it. And what we mean by that, because again, the word feminine in itself, as soon as we read it, carries with it so many subtexts. And so it's become synonym with weakness, sensitive, whatever, things that are considered pejorative in a leadership sense. So I think that what needs to change is even us as leaders and as mothers, as wives, as sisters, and our partners, we need to start changing the language. We need to pick ourselves up when we are utilizing specific language in a certain way and educate ourselves and those around us. But I 100% believe that that is the way forward to shift from this paradigm of war that we're in, of one pitted against another, to have true inclusion and understanding that you and I can have completely opposite views on many subjects, and we can still respect and connect and value each other and learn from each other.
What a deeply thoughtful, beautiful response to that. Thank you so much for spending the time to really sort through your thinking on that. I really appreciate that, and I know it will resonate. Alessandra, is the book out?
No, the book isn't out, but very, very, very soon. So yes, in the next couple of months, will be out.
Have you finished it?
I have finished it, but the editor has asked me to rewrite the third part. So that's where we're at.
We'll have you back. We'll have you back to talk about the process of writing a book. But good luck with the launch of that. I know the audience will be looking out for it. Wonderful to have you as part of the conversation today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting me.